Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be devastated by a natural disaster? We hear stories all the time about the loss of life, injury, confusion, and devastation that goes with almost any major natural disaster. A catastrophic event can happen at any time, anywhere, and usually when you least expect it. If you fail to prepare for the unexpected, you're gambling with your life and ignoring your stewardship to your family. Your children are dependent upon you to protect and care for them. What will happen to them if you fail to prepare now? Through years of experience, Jim Phillips has developed the true needs and priorities that are essential for survival. Jim's quest for these truths began in the early 60s. Years were spent developing techniques and clothing that would allow people to make it no matter what they may be faced with. In the desolation of the Arctic, Jim and his father Gil put their knowledge and skill to the ultimate test, living unsupported for weeks at a time at extremes at the top of the world. Their findings proved what they had already come to know. You can make it no matter what, if you obey the laws of how and why things work. Whether you're at the top of the world or the unforgiving desolation of Death Valley, the laws still apply. In 1984, Jim was asked by the media to demonstrate his unique clothing system. How he was immersed in freezing water for 15 minutes, driving him into hypothermia. Now, Jim remained in the cold, wet clothing with no heat or shelter and self-dried in just a matter of hours. Now, this would have killed anyone else wearing traditional clothing. The systems and techniques developed by Jim captured the interest of the military. In 1986 and 1987, Jim spent time training and outfitting all branches of the U.S. military. Now here he is with the 6th Marine Division during their Winter War Games. In 1987, Jim personally trained and outfitted astronaut and Apollo 13 commander Jim Lovell for his North Pole expedition.
How's it compare to the moon?
Well, it's about the same, a little whiter, the moon's a little grayer, but it's about the same desolation as the moon, of course.
After the expedition, he said Jim Phillips' cold weather protection system is unlike any other available and is capable of providing indefinite protection in the most severe cold weather known to man. The system was so revolutionary, Jim Phillips received Popular Science's Best of What's New in Science and Technology Award for 1989. Thousands of people have benefited from classroom and field training provided by Jim Phillips. For many, it has saved their lives.
I can't think of a situation where I couldn't probably figure out some way to survive. It gets tough sometimes. I've been in situations that have been life-threatening. But the thing that you need is some knowledge and some experience. And if you just take your time and think, you can usually figure out what to do to take care of yourself.
My knowledge and my experience, the ability to make water, makes me safe, and I can live out here all the time. I'm in no danger. My life is not threatened, no matter what happens.
The program that follows is part 1 of the training series, The Self-Reliant Family. This DVD contains the basic concepts and key principles for true preparedness and emergency survival. What you'll learn are your true needs and priorities, plus the basic understanding of how and why things really work. This program was originally recorded in the fall of 1999. Although true principles never change, the understanding of those principles and how to best teach them is continually changing. For For this reason, Jim updated portions of this program in February of 2007.
Well, we welcome you here and would like to have fun this evening with you. Now, this is somewhat of a, you can look at this as a serious subject. You can say this thing about emergency preparedness, you think about disasters and all kinds of things. And the ideas that people sometimes get is, oh, this is depressing. This is somehow an awful thing to talk about. It is something that's serious, but I want to keep things upbeat, if you will, but not flippant. But at the same time, I don't want us to get bogged down and become morose about this stuff. So I hope that we'll have a little bit of fun with it, even though it is a serious topic. Well, this is a series of 7 classes. And I call it Practical Preparedness Principle, and what I really want it to be is preparedness that works. Things that you can do, that you can make happen. One of the challenges that people have when you're taking a look at this topic of preparedness, you think of all the possible things that could happen, and then you think about all the stuff that somebody says you're supposed to have, and you have this monstrous list that's like, oh my heck, that's going to take me 20 years to build. And how do you afford it? I hope we can give you some answers that will make it practical for you to do what it is that you need to do. Well, my objective in this course is to fulfill the needs that you may have. Now, we've been listening, talking to a lot of people about what your interests are. And let me tell you what I'm finding from folks, why you're here. Now, you might think about this yourself and say, well, how come I showed up? There must be a reason why you're here. People are interested in emergency preparedness because they have children, they have spouses, they hear of things that can happen. Some folks have been through difficult times in their lives and are saying, you know what, if I was a little better prepared for these things, the next time something happens, I would be okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that could happen. And I hear people tell me, I just want to know how to make it work, how to afford preparedness. And you hear all these conflicting things about all the different things you're supposed to have, and people are saying, how do I make sense out of that? And that's what I would like this course to be able to do for you. Now, when it comes down to why I'm here, this is what I hope to do. I hope to help you become more reliable, more productive, and certainly safer in any kind of circumstance that may happen in your life, particularly emergency situations. And what I really hope to be able to do is motivate you to do something about it. Here's the bottom line. I stand up here and do my thing, you take your notes, nod, laugh at my corny jokes, and walk out of here and don't do anything. We have both wasted our time. So my interest is to give you information that you can deal with and use in a practical way, and then motivate you to go do something about it, because then we have made a difference. And one of the other things that I'm here to do is help you change your attitudes about many different things. And you'll hear me talk a little bit about attitude. That you'll have an attitude that you can make it no matter what. And I don't mean a macho, tough guy kind of an attitude. I just mean a quiet assurance that says, you know what, I can be okay no matter what happens. That's what I believe each one of us should have, and I hope that you'll be able to do that. Well, we'll talk about some fun and interesting things. Let me give you a little food for thought. Here's some ideas. Maybe some of these things you've heard before. These are some of my favorites, and I have pages and pages of them. And there's more of them that's in the manual that you can get, and you can read through some of these. But I want you to understand that happiness does not depend on people, places, and things outside of you. Happiness really depends on what's inside of each one of us. That's where our happiness comes from. And you see, I hope you understand and make this statement that to yourself is this: I am where I am today because of the decisions I made yesterday. I will be where I will be tomorrow because of the decisions that I make today. In other words, what it really says is this: you have choices about what you're going to do in your life, and you can control so much of the outcome. Well, here's another thought. Now, this one fits right in with preparedness exactly. If you know how to swim, doesn't make any difference how deep the water is. If you understand how and why things work, if you're prepared in a balanced way in all of your life, then it doesn't really make any difference what happens. You will be okay. Stop thinking about what's holding you back and start thinking about what will let you move forward. And here's a quote that I just heard today. And I don't know who said this. I'd like to find it because I'd like to give them credit for this. Chance favors the prepared mind. Chance favors the prepared mind. And that's really what we're talking about doing here. Now, I call these my 7 P's of preparedness. It's kind of cutesy, I know, but think about these words. Proper planning plus preparation prevents pitiful performance. Isn't that what it really comes down to? That's the 7 P's of preparedness. Now, the approach that we take in this class and in this course is a little bit different than what you'll typically see. What I usually see people doing is what I call the cookbook approach. And that's where they give you a recipe. And a recipe's like this. Doesn't it give you a list of stuff? It says, listen, here's the list of things that you need. And when this happens, you take this, and you take this, and you put it together, you do this, you build a recipe. It's just like baking a cake. There's a problem with the cookbook method or with the recipe method. What happens if you find yourself in a situation that nobody talked about? Or what happens if you're in a situation that somebody talked about? They said, this is what happens and this is all the stuff you should have, but you don't have any of those things that were on that list. I don't want you to be list dependent. You see, I believe that lists ultimately break down and fail. What we're really looking for and want to help you do is develop understanding of how and why things work. I believe that if you understand what your true needs and priorities are, and you understand how and why things work, that you will figure out what to do. See, each one of our situations is very different in terms of what we have economically, what it is that we may already have, our skill, our knowledge, our abilities. And you're going to have to figure out to start from where you are. But if you understand what your true needs and priorities are and how and why things work, you'll solve the problem. That's what I believe. Now, I'm kind of a strange guy, I guess. My wife says I'm a strange guy. She should know that because we just a few days ago, well, we've been together 30 years now, a little over 30 years. And so she's probably got me figured out. Now, I haven't figured her out yet, but that's the way it's supposed to be, isn't it, guys? And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that seems to be the way that it is. But she's kind of figured me out, and she says, you're strange. Actually, she says I'm weird sometimes. And that comes out of some experiences that I've had. I've been caught on the desert. I'm the kind of a guy that will drive up the road that people say, don't drive up that road, you might get stuck. Well, if I want to go up that road, I'm not afraid of getting stuck. So one time I found myself in Death Valley. Now this was in, let's see, when was this? 1967. And I was at University in New Mexico. I had my good friend, he was out at Stanford. I drove out to Stanford, picked him up. We're going to go tour the West for a month. And one of the things that I had wanted to do was drive the length of Death Valley. Now, I'd driven across it and I'd camped in it before, but I'd never gone the full length of it. And I said, let's drive up the length of Death Valley. This does happen to be in July. By the way, that is the best time of the year to go to Death Valley. Do you know why? It's not crowded, you're right. There's no traffic there. Well, there's this little dirt road. I assume it's still a dirt road when you leave Baker, California, and you go north, and I don't know, we're 50, 60 miles up the road, and there's this sign that says, don't drive on this road. It's like between April and October because nobody drives the road. You get stuck out here, you're going to die. It basically says that. Well, that's the kind of road I like to drive up. And there we found ourselves up that road quite a number of miles, and that's when my old 56 Ford decided to bail out. And I found myself out there stranded for the day, and I had to make parts to make that thing run out there. And my friend passed out from heat stroke, and he was sitting in the car in there trying to recover from that, and I'm out there making parts for it. I learned a few things about heat that day. It was 127 degrees. This is what the Rangers told us when we got in there, but we made it just fine. I've been from those extremes to the winter and to the cold. We spent time above the Arctic Circle. I love camping in the Arctic. It's a great place to go snow camping. Do we have any snow campers here? How many people? There's a few guys that'll admit to being weird. Well, I love to snow camp. Some people think you're strange. Do you know it's a wonderful time of the year to camp? Now, why do most people not camp in the winter? Yeah, it's cold. No, it's not that it's cold, it's that it hurts. Okay, isn't that it? I don't know how you are, but when I get cold, that hurts. So I agree with you if you say, I don't like the winter camp because it's cold, but suppose that you could be just as comfortable as we are right now. Do you remember that statement that I said? That if you know how to swim, it doesn't matter how deep the water is. If you know how to stay warm, it doesn't matter what the temperature is. So snow camping, 1,000 miles north of the Arctic Circle in winter, where the high temperature that we ever saw during that trip was 10 below zero. That was the high. That's a wonderful camping trip to be on if you know how to do that. So I have done some strange things. Lived out of a backpack on top of mountains and have been playing with and experimenting with and teaching now issues of personal and family preparedness for quite a number of years and have fun doing that. We also work with commercial industrial clients such as AT&T, US West, and other people like that, training their personnel how to live safely and comfortably out in the cold because some of them get trapped out there. So that's a little bit of my background. But what I really enjoy is teaching individuals and families about personal preparedness, no matter what may happen. Now, I'm not quite sure why you're here. Each one of you is here for a different reason, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about what my roots and my foundations are. You can accept these things, take them at face value, but you may want to take a look some other sources. Now, my background is I'm a Christian, and I love the gospel, and that's an important part of my life. And you may want to take a look in the Bible because there's some interesting things in there. Because sometimes people ask me about, well, how about food storage and about emergency preparedness? I mean, can you find some of that in the Scriptures? And it's like, yes, you can. But do you know what the oldest reference to that is? This is kind of for those of you who'd like to look it up. Take a look in Genesis 6 and 7. Now, what's Genesis 6 and 7 about? Anybody here tell me what that is? What was going on back then? That was Noah. Okay, now there's an issue about preparedness in there. I mean, they took an ark, and he had to do something. And if he had not got involved in taking care of that problem, well, there would have been some difficulties. Later on, we hear a story about who? Joseph. There was an issue about preparedness back in the land of Egypt and about some famines that were going to come, about 7 years of fat and then 7 years of lean. There wasn't time to get prepared. Now, one of the earliest notations that I found about food storage directly, another one is in Leviticus 26:10. And this is what it says, "And ye shall eat old store, and bring forth the old because of the new." Have it, store it, use it, rotate it. Interesting, all the way back there. Now, here's one that I think is important to me. It's really the foundation. In fact, this whole issue about preparedness is about stewardship, folks. That's what it really is. It's our stewardship. Here's stewardship put in very plain terms. You can find this in 1 Timothy 5:8. It says this, and I say this to the husbands and to the fathers, but it applies to everybody, but listen to this. "But if any provide not for his own, and specially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." That's pretty plain. We have a responsibility in the good times and in the lean times. And it says, when it's good, prepare for when it's lean. And of course, a lot of you, you're familiar with Revelations and some of the things that are talked about in there. Revelations 18 is a very interesting one. You ought to go read that in light of some of the things that we hear might be going on. Now, I'm not prophetic about these things. I don't know what happens when and where. I just know that life happens. We need to be ready for that. Things have happened in my life, they'll happen in your life. Now, this is part one of this series. In part one of this series, I call the foundation for true preparedness. And the foundation for true preparedness is simply this. It is to understand your true needs and priorities. That's part one, and that's what we're talking about. Now, let me give you what I call the truth about life. See if this fits in with the issue of preparedness. There is no doubt that tomorrow will come and that things will happen. This has kind of become my moniker, what I say. There's no doubt that tomorrow will come, and there is no dispute that things happen. But how you're prepared to meet tomorrow will make all the difference in the world. If you are prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it will be an adventure. And I believe that life should be an adventure. Therefore, I believe that being prepared for all kinds of things is important. Now, some people say, well, I want to survive whatever comes. Okay, how do you know you're really prepared? How can you tell that you're really, really prepared? You need to ask yourself these questions. And what evidence do you have? So ask yourself, how can I know? What evidence do I have? Can I prove it to myself? By the time we're done, I believe that you will be able to do that. So make note of those questions, if you will, because they're important for you to answer. Now, what are you preparing for? Well, here in our area, what's the one thing they tell us all the time? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. What's that? That's earthquake. Okay, we live in an area. In fact, there's millions of people that live in an area where there can be an earthquake. We have winter storms. We have ice storms. Hey, have anybody ever heard of hurricanes happening? How about tornadoes? How about economic turndown for individuals, for communities, for whole industries? How about depressions? How about wars? All of those things happen. Now, I don't want to get hung up on the negative side of things because I'm not a gloom and doom kind of a guy. But here's what you need to do. One of the ways that you can tell that you need to work on something is figure out what scares you the most. Take a look at the thing that you say, oh my, this is just awful. And then don't run from it. Embrace it in the sense that you need to figure out how to solve the problem. Well, things happen as we're talking about, and here's kind of the list. You think if you can come up with some other things. It's earthquakes, it's blizzards, it's hurricanes, depressions, terrorist acts, famine, volcanoes, drought, tyranny, tornadoes, disabilities to individuals, floods, ice storms, loss of income, tsunamis, war, pestilence, climatic change, and oh, by the way, don't forget Y2K. People that have come to me over the past several years and said, you know, what about this end of the century computer rollover, loss of date thing that goofs everything up? And my attitude was simply, well, if that gets you excited about getting prepared, please go do it. Because if you're prepared for Y2K, you're prepared for all kinds of things. So no matter what happens with Y2K, doesn't matter if you're prepared. Now, what are the kinds of things that can cause us to be in trouble? Whether it's Y2K or whether it's an ice storm, we can lose communications in our commerce. Food production and delivery can be disrupted for a lot of different reasons. We have issues of sewage and waste disposal. And by the way, if you want to understand what it is by sewage and waste disposal problems on that, just take a look at that white porcelain thing that we have in our house and think about how are you going to handle that if that thing doesn't work? What are you going to do about that? Most of us don't have experience with that. We're going to talk about that and how you'll be okay. We have issues about water delivery and whatever can interrupt those things to you. For fuel oil and propane and natural gas. Electricity, by the way, isn't electricity an interesting one? Electricity is the one that kind of weaves our whole society together. Anybody ever hear of long-term loss of electricity in this country in the past few years? We had some ice storms last year or the year before. Massive ice storm up in the northeast area. There were some people up there without electricity in January and February for 6 weeks. That was very disruptive to their lives. Are you prepared for loss of electricity for 6 weeks? I think those are things we need to prepare for. The issue is this, and one of the things you're going to hear me talk about in depth, particularly in part 2, is the issue of cold weather and winter, because what I found is that people are very poorly prepared for winter. For us in this area where we have the potential of this earthquake, is there some unwritten law that says earthquakes only happen in the summer during sunny, good weather? Could we not have an earthquake in the middle of January, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a blizzard? That's kind of the worst time to have an earthquake, I think. Well, you need to be prepared for that, because if you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it will be an adventure. That's the bottom line. So we don't want to wait until the lights are out and the heat's off and you're huddled under the blankets freezing, looking at that thermostat saying, now what am I going to do? You need to be preparing now. Some people have said, well, what I have is a wood-burning stove. I'm here to tell you, a wood-burning stove is not the answer. It can be part of the answer for some people. For most people, a wood-burning stove is not the answer because there aren't enough of them, there isn't enough wood, and if we all tried to use wood to heat with, we'd all die from the air. We just can't do that. There have to be better solutions. And so I don't want to talk about something that doesn't work for everybody. So we're going to teach you very clearly and simply what you can do to take care of the winter problem. It is solvable, folks. Now, about this time, there's people in here going like, will somebody please just tell me what to buy? I just want the list. Now, there's some of you left-brain, list-oriented people that are, I'm going to drive you nuts in here because I don't really do lists. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, and I'll show you a lot of things. Here's my answer to somebody that says, just tell me the list of stuff to buy. If I just tell you what to buy, when it really gets tough, you're just going to give up and die. And I don't want that to happen. So I'm not going to just give you a list. Well, what does it take to really be prepared? Now, if you want a list, here's the list. You can write these down. Here's kind of the list of the things that it takes to be prepared. Resourcefulness. Common sense. Oh, by the way, have you ever noticed something about common sense? One of the things you can say about common sense is it ain't very common. Understanding. Knowledge. resilience, tolerance, wisdom, courage, patience, desire, skill. All of those things kind of go into the mix of what it takes to be okay. Oh, and then by the way, once you have those things, then you should have some stuff stored. But those things really come first. Now, let's talk about learning the laws of true preparedness. I put together a little course a number of years ago. It was the first one we actually published this way, called Surviving Against All Odds. And surviving against all odds, to me, was the most important thing that I've had to say about this issue, because it's really about what's inside of your head and your heart more than just having a bunch of stuff. And I'm going to lift some things out of that course, Surviving Against All Odds, as we go along here. One of them is this, and I'm going to do something up here. Let me write this on the board for you and help you understand this little thing I call the expectations versus reality. And your expectations versus the reality, what is going on, is very, very important. Take a look at this concept right here. You ever notice that when you take a look at what you expect life to be? Now, this is a general principle. This fits for all of life. You have this expectation. This we're going to call our expectations right here. And you have this list of things that are in there. Now, the expectations may be about marriage, about children, about going to school and getting a job. It may be all kinds of things. In our case, it may be, well, what do I expect to happen when the earthquake comes and there I am finally on my own? I expect it to be like this. Have you ever noticed something about expectations? When reality hits, have you ever observed that it's very different? And you've noticed that these things are in here and you're trying to cram all of this expectation that you had in this little circle here, and it doesn't fit. Now, what happens is to people when they look at this and they say, I thought it was going to be like this and it's like this, all of a sudden they decide that they're unhappy. They're under stress. They're miserable. They become angry. What I'm here to tell you is this: if you haven't figured this out already, is you have expectations about what's going to go on. You have expectations about how you're going to survive in an emergency. You have expectations about life in general. If you haven't figured it out already, I'm here to tell you that when you get there, it's going to be different than you thought. Now then, if you understand that's the way it's going to be, then it won't be such a shock to you when you get there and say, well, this is not what I expected, but so what? My point is this: deal with it. Because that's what you're going to have to do. I don't mean that flippantly, and I don't mean that unkindly, but the reality is you're going to have to deal with it. If you understand things will be different, if you understand that before you get to there, then it won't be such a shock to you. That's the way it's going to be when you face one of these emergencies, calamities, difficulties, disasters. It's going to be different than you expect. I promise you that. Now, that's one thing I will claim to be somewhat prophetic about, only because everything I've ever expected to happen ends up being a little different than that. So why wouldn't it be that way? Isn't that what makes it fun? Here's another one that I think you should understand, and this is the one that I call, it's the principle of position. Think about this when you're trying to go to your goal. Now, in this little class, we're talking about the goal of being prepared for something. And so you set this goal, and this is what you do. You just say, well, here I am right here, and I've got this goal that I want to go over to here. Now, by the way, this is a thing, I spent a whole hour on this one time in a class that I did a while back, and it's kind of about goal setting. I'm going to ask you this question right here. By show of hands, I want to see all the people in this room that have hit every goal that you've ever set. Good. I'm glad there were no hands that go up, because if somebody put their hand off, I'm going to be ticked off at you. Because I'll tell you what, I've missed more goals than I think that I've even set sometimes. Oh, by the way, remember the law of expectation? It's kind of like, we'll deal with it. It's okay. That's kind of the way it goes. But how do you hit your goals more reliably? I used to ask myself this question: why do I keep missing these darn things? I'd like to spend some time on this, but just let me give you this concept. So here you have this goal, and you set this course to that goal, and you may set a very, very precise course. Now, very much like a compass course, let's say that you set this course to that goal, and you say something like this: well, that course that I need to set is at 42 degrees, 19 minutes, and 3 seconds. That's a very precise compass course. and the distance happens to be 9.7215 miles. I'm an engineer. You can tell all the decimal points. That's how you know I'm an engineer. And then you say, I can travel at 1.11 miles per day, so it's going to take me 8.758 days to get there. See, that's a very precise goal that you set. All of a sudden, you wake up over here, and you find that you're right there. And you said, how did I get over there? I was aimed at this point. Do you know what the problem most of us have is? We don't know where the heck we're starting from. The problem was you set your compass course, but you were here, and you set your course, and you ended up over there. You need to get back over here so you could go there. The difficulty that we have very often is we take a look at what we think our reality is, and sometimes we look at it and we say, oh my heck, that looks so bad. I couldn't possibly be there. So we pretend like we're someplace else. And if you set a course from some place that you wish you were, but you aren't really, you're not going to end up where you want to go. It's exactly the way it works in your emergency preparedness. What I'm telling you is this. You're going to have to get real with who you are, what you know, what you have, what you can do, and what your goals are, and then solve the problem.